Welcome to Murdock's Music Minute. In case you're wondering, this video is probably going online around October, November. So if you're wondering why I'm sitting here in, pretty light clothing, I'm filming this video in July 2023, and we're currently having a bit of a summer heat wave. So if you're watching in autumn or winter, that is why. And if you are watching this video in the future at any point, then of course this information was completely useless for you now. Other than that, you've found out that I'm not always immediately uploading the videos that I'm shooting. Yes, you've wasted your time with 2 minutes of irrelevant content now. But irrelevant content certainly was not something that Pete Townsend wanted to have on his albums. On the very contrary, when he started working with his band on a huge rock opera about philosophy, childhood traumatization, messianic megalomania, and, well, pinball. How a rowdy mod band came to those heady heights of huge concept albums, as always, in a short look at the band's history.
The founding members of The Who, Roger Daltrey, John Entwistle and Pete Townsend, all met at the same grammar school in London and all shared a love for rock and roll. Roger Daltrey, however, coming from a working-class background and being a bit of a troublemaker, was expelled from school as a teenager and then founded The Detours, a professional band that played rock and roll, surf and jazz covers. Daltrey back then played guitar. He recruited John Entwistle as the new bass player, who in turn suggested his school friend Townsend as an additional guitarist. After several drummer changes and falling out with singer Colin Dawson, Daltrey himself took over the lead vocals in The Detours, making Townsend the sole guitarist. This reduced lineup also caused Entwistle to develop a more melodious and prominent bass style. In 1964, the group renamed as The Who. They now already had regular gigs at hotels and clubs and could secure an audition with Fontana Records. The label wasn't convinced of their drummer, and so The Who started looking for a replacement. They finally found the young and enthusiastic Keith Moon, who then played in a surf and beat band called the Beachcombers. Moon joined The Who in 1964. The band shortly after changed their manager and teamed up with Peter Madden, who saw The Who as a mod band. For a while, The Who became The High Numbers, under which name they released the first single with Fontana that, however, failed to chart. The band decided to return to their old band name, developed a wilder stage performance, including Pete Townsend's famous windmill moves. The Who once more changed their management and attracted the interest of Kit Lambert and Chris Stamp. Kit Lambert encouraged Townsend to write more own songs. By accident, Townsend broke the neck of his guitar at a stage with a low ceiling. The band created their auto-destructive stage shows, with Townsend and Moon frequently smashing their instruments and gear on stage. This boosted their popularity in London's clubs, but also their debts. Townsend's original I Can't Explain attracted the interest of former Kinks producer Shall Tell Me. He produced the song and the single reached the UK top 10 in early 1965. Also, the next single, Anyway, Anyhow, Anywhere, reached the British top 10, despite making unconventional use of feedback noises. The Who fully arrived as a hit singles band with the classic, energy-filled My Generation, released in October 1965, which became their biggest UK hit, reaching number 2. This was followed by their debut album, combining Townsend originals and some R&B covers. The band subsequently fell out with Tell Me, which resulted in a legal feud that lasted decades. But The Who went on to release stellar singles like Substitute and the quirky Boris the Spider. Ever since their foundation, The Who had inner tensions and sometimes physical conflicts, as well as fights over who should dominate in the group, but always managed to patch things up. Their second album, A Quick One, came out in 1966 and featured Townsend's first longer, multi-part piece, paving the way for his elaborate concepts and more artistic ideas, a tendency that was supported by manager Kid Lambert. The Who's violent stage act gained them increasing public awareness and a certain image, especially shaped by Townsend's aggressive live appearances and Keith Moon's increasingly mad actions on and off stage. They also became increasingly popular in the USA and had their first major tour of the States in summer 1967. Their next album, Sell Out, was a loose concept album paying tribute to the pirate radio stations that had been crucial in promoting the band's early singles. It had psychedelic as well as humorous elements and showed a very versatile, diverse musical palette from The Who. After a disastrous tour of Australia that ended with the band getting forced to leave the country, Pete Townshend started to occupy himself with the teachings of Meher Baba. Based on those, he developed a complex narrative to form the content of The Who's next album, a rock opera.
And thus, the world's first rock opera was born and released in May 1969. The idea of doing more concept works and telling longer stories with different characters and very often quite psychedelic plot lines, however, was not new. The Beatles had started the whole concept and rock music as a piece of art trend in 1967, of course, with Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which admittedly had a very, very loose concept and, can maybe rather be seen or regarded as a thematic album. Also, the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds, although not a real concept album, clearly had an atmospheric and thematic unity. Later on, Brian Wilson failed in delivering maybe the concept album to end all concept albums, the legendary Smile. But also peers of The Who had been a little bit faster in releasing actual concept albums or even something that could be considered rock opera. First of all, the Pretty Things with their album SF Sorrow, which probably is the real first rock opera. This album also told a whole story with a chronological plot line over an entire album with various songs and different characters that appeared. But like practically everything the Pretty Things did in their career, this was not meant to meet public success. This role was reserved for The Who's Tommy, and that is why Tommy still is usually regarded the first proper rock concept album and the first rock opera. Other bands that dabbled with concept albums, for instance, also were The Kinks with also their legendary The Kings Are the Village Green Preservation Society album. Flopped back then. Nowadays, it is regarded as one of the most important albums the Kinks ever did. And the Kings would go on to become almost obsessed with concept albums or story albums later on in the 1970s, when they released a couple of story-based concept albums each year. And also the Moody Blues had added conceptual approaches and truly symphonic backups to their music with the album Days of Future Past. Still, Tommy is the mother of all those rock operas, even though it wasn't the first one to be released. Pete Townsend might have been a little bit grumpy, given that the Befriended Pretty Things were the first ones to release their rock opera. But still, Tommy is the first one to be a double album, and it has a really complicated and rather gap-filled plotline, which we will see a little bit later on into this review. Now, still, you have to give it to Pete Townsend that early on in The Who's career, he already had plans and ideas for more conceptual, more complex stories that he wanted to tell in his songs. This tendency already started back in 1965-66, when there were first ideas for a concept story, a concept work that would have become more a kind of a science fiction story. The single I'm a Boy is a remain of that concept, which never came to be. Then The Who did their first mini rock opera within, I think, 6 or 7 minutes on the Quick One album, namely the title track, which was the longest thing they had ever put on record, and which told the story of infidelity with, a humorous approach. The whole song had different sections, but this was all still very much in the idiom of 1960s pop music. Also, the third album by The Who Sell Out, ended with a mini rock opera, the very strange esoteric Rael, which, if you listen carefully, already contains some musical motifs and themes that then were reused for songs on Tommy. So even though maybe the Pretty Things and the Kings were a bit faster, Pete Townsend certainly can be called the first figure in rock music to really develop this idea of rock operas. He was not alone in this. The Who's manager, Kid Lambert, who came from an upper-class family with an arts background, very much promoted the ideas of Pete Townsend, and allegedly it was him who coined the phrase of a rock opera. And if it had been for Kid Lambert, the whole Tommy album would have even featured an orchestra. Thankfully, this did not happen, because I think it wouldn't have worked given the anarchic framework of The Who and Keith Moon's real struggles with timekeeping. The story that Tommy tells maybe is flawed by trying to cram too many different ideas and issues into one concept. We learn about Tommy, who as a child is traumatized by watching his father, who returns from the war, kill the lover of his mother. The mother had thought that Captain Walker, who was, I think, with the Air Force, was lost in battle and had started a new relationship. Captain Walker returns and kills the new partner of his wife. Tommy is a witness to all this and, yes, develops trauma and what nowadays would be called psychosomatic trauma symptoms, which leads to him being deaf, dumb, and blind. The desperate parents try everything to cure Tommy. They also fall prey to some quacks, or, well, they even go to extremes, trying rather unorthodox methods, including not only a psychiatrist, but also drug intake, as depicted in the famous song Acid Queen. Along the way, Tommy also has to suffer physical abuse from his bully cousin Kevin and sexual abuse from his pervert Uncle Ernie. He eventually is sent to a psychiatrist who tries a new methodology with Tommy by placing him in front of a mirror. And the idea here is to have Tommy confront himself with his own problems, with his own personality, basically. And that eventually causes the reawakening or the return to the real world for Tommy. However, now all of a sudden, he believes himself to be a kind of messianic figure with the mission to lead others to this sort of personal or spiritual insight. The movement, the cult, the sect, however you would like to call it, that he establishes, however, turns against him. The young people reject his teachings, and it all ends up in a violent uproar against Tommy and his whole philosophy. Having maybe understood the errors of his own ways, Tommy at the end is alone again and returns to more inward reflection. Well, if this wasn't complicated enough, there are certainly some loose threads in the concept of Tommy, or in the story, at least on the Tommy album, and some gaps in the plot that I think even Pete Townsend couldn't really explain or fill out. So basically, you get the feeling that the whole story of Tommy wasn't really finished or, thought up to its very end. But still, this is a great achievement for a rock band that before was best known for smashing up their gear on stage. What is also interesting is that Tommy, despite beginning with an overture and featuring a tongue-in-cheek underture, manages to avoid all the pompous aspects that you would expect from something called a rock opera. This is just a rock band, The Who, telling a story in various songs that you could also enjoy on their own, at least most of these songs. Oh yeah, and of course there's also something with pinball in the story. But let's go through the album track by track. So, like any opera, Tommy indeed starts with an instrumental overture in which the band already quotes or briefly presents musical themes and motifs that later on appear in the proper tracks of the album. After the exciting overture that even showed John Entwistle's skills as a horn player, the short, sweet, and very gentle It's a Boy depicts the birth of Tommy. This song, like a lot of tracks on the album, is sung by Pete Townsend and not by Roger Daltrey. The song reuses a part from the track Glow Girl, which was a leftover from the Who Sell Out sessions, and a song about, I think, a plane crash, which also featured the lines It's a Boy, It's a Boy. Like actually a lot of the songs on Tommy, the basis for the track is not what you maybe would expect from The Who, namely Pete Townsend's powerful electric guitar. No, it is his acoustic guitar playing. So, arguably, Tommy is one of The Who's most acoustic albums, even though, of course, we later on get the full band in action. Following this, we are provided with some timeline for the story. It's 1921, so of course Captain Walker fought in World War I and now returns only to murder his wife's new lover. On 1921, again, Pete Townsend is the main vocalist, and The Who here play in a very restrained, very tender manner. It's a lovely song, even though it actually has a very gruesome content. And, excuse me, and despite being a rather short track that might be easily overlooked, especially in view of the, biggies that are to come on the Tommy album, it is a quintessential track for the whole plotline. Because this is where Tommy witnesses the murder and subsequently develops a dissociative disorder, becoming deaf, dumb, and blind. The band underlines this crucial moment in the story with harmony vocals that repeat, "You didn't see it, you didn't hear it." So his parents actually put pressure on him to more or less forget what he has seen. And this then causes the whole traumatic situation Tommy finds himself in as a boy and a teenager.
You didn't hear it, you didn't see it, you won't see nothing, no one, never in your life, you never heard it. How absurd it all seems without any proof.
Amazing Journey now takes us into the world and the perception of Tommy. For the first time, Roger Daltrey is the singer here. And again, this song, the main riff of the song, which is a lovely, very catchy and positive sounding riff, is played rather softly as far as The Who are concerned. Until then, Keith Moon comes in with some extraordinary drum rolls. This is one of his finest moments on the album. Tommy is depicted in a world of fantasy, shut off from the real world. He has musical dreams. He lives in a world of vibrations, which later on plays an important role for him as the pinball wizard. The Amazing Journey segues into the track Sparks, which takes us on the instrumental journey through Tommy's dreams and through his perception of the world as well in terms of sounds and music. It starts with a really cool mid-tempo groove, and then the track moves through various sections, again harkening back to motifs from the track Rael. I don't know why they reused so many bits from this one. Maybe Pete Townsend thought that hardly anybody had heard the Who Sell Out album, which to me still doesn't make a lot of sense. Anyways, while maybe not the most essential track of the Tommy album, this one is a great showcase for the technical abilities and the wonderful playing and the unity of the single members in The Who. Especially John Entwistle's bass is very prominent on this track, and it's a delight to listen to him playing here. Then we get to The Hawker, or Eyesight to the Blind, which actually is an old blues song by Sonny Boy Williamson, but which was cleverly incorporated into the Tommy track list and also really reworked musically by Pete Townsend. There are musical passages here which also reoccur later on the album. For instance, for the phrase "Tommy, can you hear me?", which is repeated again and again. The song as such, or the lyrics, don't really drive the plot forward, or actually we don't really have a connection to the plot. I guess The Who simply enjoyed playing the song. Here and there are passages on the album where one gets the feeling that in terms of plot development, the album is treading water a little bit, and this is certainly the case here. Maybe they also added it to sort of pad out the album to arrive at a full double album length. But things get really going on side 2 of the original vinyl release, starting with Christmas. Not only is this a very powerful and catchy rock song, it also introduces some interesting ideas about religious upbringing, the parents being saddened by the fact that Tommy does not know what Christmas is, and he cannot enjoy, the whole joy around Christmas, especially for children. But most of all, he also doesn't have a concept of religion. So how can he be saved from the eternal grave, indeed? This song is where the important phrases or motifs that come up again and again throughout the album are fully introduced. We have the section where the parents, sung by Pete Townsend here, ask again and again, "Tommy, can you hear me?" And the famous "see me, feel me" line that Tommy sings also in other parts of the album. Roger Daltrey sings Tommy, and he turns in a very powerful, great vocal performance on this track. And I think the progress of Roger Daltrey as a singer is really an interesting part of The Who's history, and it is also very noticeable on Tommy. If you compare it to the way Daltrey sang on the earlier Who albums, he even belts out a few yells on this track. They are not to be compared with his massive performance on the album Who's Next, but they already show that he came into his own as a singer here and became more self-confident and more upfront.
Peeping round the doors to see what passes off a free curiosity. And Tommy doesn't know what day it is. Yeah, he doesn't know Jesus was what really. How can he be saved from the eternal grave?
The next song is Cousin Kevin. The parents are going out and they leave Tommy alone with his probably older cousin Kevin, who unfortunately is a sadist and really mistreats the deaf, dumb and blind boy that is, left in his clutches. This is a song that had already existed in a different form with other lyrics, and Townsend then asked Roger Daltrey to adapt the song for the Tommy project. It is filled with delightfully sarcastic lines and has one of the typical John Entwistle melodies that often use half-tone steps. John Entwistle had a sense for very dark humor, and I guess he took some real joy in writing this song.
What would you do if I shut you outside to stand in the rain and get close so you die? I'm the school bully, the classroom cheat.
order to somehow cure Tommy's symptoms, the parents sent him to what is described on the album as a gypsy queen. Basically, we're talking about a cross between a drug dealer and a prostitute here. This is one of the biggest rockers on the album. It has a certain urgency. Pete Townsend, interestingly, sings the role of the Acid Queen on the album. And Tommy here is not only given drugs, but there's also some sexual initiation involved. It is a very strong song, again with some extraordinary fills by Keith Moon on the drums. But then if you talk about Keith Moon playing drum fills, that's actually all that Keith Moon ever did for an entire song. The definitive version of Acid Queen, however, for me is the one from the Tommy movie that came out some years later in the mid-70s, I think, where Tina Turner played and sang the Acid Queen. And of course, that was a force of nature that Pete Townsend could not reach.
I'll show him what he could be now. Just give me one night. I'm the gypsy, the acid queen. Hey, before we start the gypsy, I'm guaranteed to tear your soul apart.
In the Tommy movie by Ken Russell, I think also the Hawker Eyesight to the Blind is placed either before or after the Acid Queen scene, which in this case then also gives this cover version a more purposeful meaning in the Tommy project because it seems to be an introduction of the Acid Queen character. The Acid Queen is followed by Underture. This is basically a 10-minute continuation of Sparks with The Who playing a long instrumental, and it probably reflects the drug hallucinations that Tommy is experiencing. I am not too keen on this track. As I've said, it rehashes a lot of the musical themes that already were played on Sparks, and those again were already reused parts from Rael. To make matters worse, Tommy's parents leave him in the care of his uncle Ernie, who then fiddles about. This is another track written by John Entwistle, and if it wasn't for the unpleasant subject matter, it would actually be quite a ditty. In the film version, this of course was the perfect screen moment for Keith Moon. And then comes the classic Who single, Pinball Wizard. Tommy develops not only an interest but a real skill for the pinball game and pinball machines. The idea behind this is that he sort of can feel the vibrations of the ball, and because of this becomes the best pinball player of the whole region. This obsession with pinball was already hinted at in the lyrics of Christmas. This is a classic Who rocker with its suspended chords and its iconic riff. Roger Daltrey again has a very excellent vocal performance on this track, and interestingly, he sings from the perspective of the former Pinball King who is defeated by Tommy. So there's a complete change in perspective and in characters here, which for a rock record really was quite revolutionary and creative approach. Taken on its own, it was probably a little bit strange to hear The Who sing about pinball, but this really is the catchiest and most accessible song of the record. There is a background story to this song, that apparently Pete Townsend was discussing his concept for Tommy and the whole idea with a critic called Nick Cohn, who was not really convinced about it, but knowing that Cohn was a big pinball fan, Townsend just added that, well, maybe Tommy could play pinball and I'm going to write a song about it to be included on the album. And immediately Cohn was an avid fan of the Tommy album and wrote respectively positive review. I've already talked about Tommy as an album with lots of acoustic guitar, and also on Pinball Wizard, even though we get some classic Pete Townsend electric guitar power chords on this one, but even on Pinball Wizard, actually a lot that is crucial to the song is happening on the acoustic guitar. Besides that, there's some really tasteful drumming going on from Keith Moon. His style wasn't simply chaos. Did I mention I'm quite a Keith Moon fan?
Sure plays a mean pinball. I thought I was somebody table king. I just handed my pinball crown to him.
After a short piano ditty, or rather more an announcement, there's a doctor, we get to Go to the Mirror, which is the song written from the perspective of the psychiatrist who tells Tommy's parents that his symptoms or his illness is purely psychosomatic. And his cure is sitting the boy in front of a mirror to gaze at his own reflection. This is a key moment in the plot as the events are now turning. The song reuses themes that had already occurred before on the album. Again, the feel me, see me, touch me, heal me line is used to great effect in this song. And also the right behind you, I see the millions phrase is introduced here, which plays an important role at the end of the album. Again, this alludes probably to the fact that Tommy possibly sees more than his own reflection in the mirror, or that he sees himself as this messianic leader of millions. The next two tracks are very short. First, the very happy acoustic guitar sing-along, Tommy Can You Hear Me, with the whole band singing together, harmonizing. This is not a very important song, but I've always quite enjoyed this one. And this then leads into Smash the Mirror, which is also another crucial scene of the Tommy opera, when his mother, frustrated by Tommy just gazing at his own reflection all the time, goes to the mirror and actually smashes it. And this violent intervention brings Tommy back to life, so to speak. He suddenly can hear, see, and talk again. This track is rather bluesy and almost a little bit funky in the way that the Who play here. Accordingly, Smash the Mirror ends with the noise of broken glass and a psychedelic, I think, piano chord. And this then leads into Sensation, which is probably the most gorgeous tune of the whole album. It's a really melodious pop rock song, very heartfelt vocals from Pete Townsend. I think the roots of this song date back to the Who Sell Out sessions. Certainly one of my favorites from the Tommy album.
Lovers break, caresses for me, love enhanced when I've gone by. You feel me coming, a new vibration. From afar you'll see me. I'm a sensation. I'm a sensation.
The song features beautiful piano and acoustic guitar chords, and again John Entwistle brings his horn to the proceedings. We now enter the stage where Tommy takes on the role of this megalomaniac leader of people, this spiritual guru. So he can perceive the world again, but he's still not connected with it. This part of the story is then also told in the track Sally Simpson, which is maybe a little bit confusing for listeners because it is a story within the story. All of a sudden, we are told the tale of this girl, Sally Simpson, who goes to see the new Messiah, Tommy, and then is badly injured during the chaos that is caused by the audience going wild when Tommy hits the stage. Interestingly, the track itself is quite relaxed. It's, again, an acoustic ditty with sort of barroom piano, very breezy, grooves along in quite relaxed fashion. But I think this song deals with a bigger issue, namely the maybe darker or the undesirable and the less controllable aspects of stardom and fandom. So that is what made the song actually always quite interesting to me. Such unpleasant events, strangely enough, don't stop Tommy from enjoying his popularity, and he now decides that he has to spiritually enlighten people, and that is only possible if the people follow his way and experience the world in the way that he had experienced it. I'm Free. This is one of my favorite Who songs. It's based on a stellar riff. On the album, again, played in a rather subdued style. I actually prefer the film soundtrack version over the album version because for the movie, The Who re-recorded the song and played it with a lot more energy. But still, also this album, this original album version simply is a great song. Apparently, parts of the drum track were not played by Keith Moon, who somehow had some troubles with the timing of the song or with some playing that Pete Townsend wanted to have on the track. And there's also an acoustic guitar solo in the middle of the song. I Am Free and its main riff are pure joy of living. I'm not sure that's the right key. This is how it really goes.
I'm free. I'm free. And freedom tastes of reality.
At the end of I'm Free, the Pinball Wizard riff is echoed one more time. And then we are welcomed to Tommy's new headquarters of his movement, his spiritual headquarters. Welcome accordingly lulls you in. You could easily picture this song really sung by esoteric movements during their get-togethers, but then tension is brought into the song because more and more people are showing up and the pace of the song also picks up. The next track then is Tommy's Holiday Camp, and we now easily can sense that things will go horribly wrong. Apparently, Tommy has created a sort of holiday camp for his followers to be indoctrinated, maybe, but it is Uncle Ernie who is given the task of taking care of the new campus. This is a bizarre novelty number, which is a bit of a light-hearted change of pace at this point in the album. The combination of, I think, banjo and organ used in this song emphasizes its bizarre nature. The people, though, start to question Tommy's teachings and his strict rules, and they become disillusioned with his whole movement, and they question their own hero worship, maybe to some extent. And this all is reflected in the epic finale of the album, We're Not Gonna Take It. So the masses now are speaking and rejecting Tommy's newfound way to enlightenment, basically. The song reuses some of the established themes from the album in a very rocking, epic way. This is maybe one of the most important tracks, actually, of the whole album. And it's not really clear which viewpoint Townsend actually supports here. Does he criticize the masses for not adhering to rules in order to really seek true enlightenment? Or does he criticize actually the hero worship and all the false gurus in the world? In any case, this whole attitude was something The Who continued to pursue, most prominently on the fantastic Won't Get Fooled Again on Who's Next, their album from 1971. So that's the whole double album, Tommy by The Who. Tommy can be considered The Who's breakthrough album. It was the most successful album they had released at that point. Went to number 2 in the UK and number 7 in the USA, then re-entered the US charts later and even went to number 4 then. It also, of course, will always remain a crucial and important album for the general rock and roll history, due to the whole rock opera concept, the rather complex but also confusing storyline that is told, and of course The Who's Tommy then saw various reinterpretations. The film I mentioned by Ken Russell, which is pure 1970s decadence. I guess the film set was simply debauchery. I quite like this film, and as I've mentioned, some of the soundtrack versions I think surpass the album versions with various singers and played with a whole lot of more energy. There was a stage production, I think, of Tommy and various other forms. But then again, of course, it is good and always important to go back to the original version, which is the 1969 album, of course. To me, Tommy has always been an interesting part of The Who's discography because, on the one hand, I think it is one of the most popular albums and maybe also one of the most inventive albums. On the other hand, Tommy is not the album I would pick out first if I wanted to introduce somebody to the classic Who sound. For that purpose, I would probably rather pick Who's Next, or maybe even their debut album. Tommy features some excellent musical performances by The Who and some of the best songs they ever wrote. The sound of it is clearly rooted in the late 1960s. It's a product of its time, as a 1960s rock album. But that also makes it so endearing, because if you hear the term rock opera, you probably rather think of some overblown progressive rock project, and that's not what Tommy is. Tommy is very much a straightforward rock record with some complex passages and some intriguing interludes. But at the core of it, this is a collection of quite accessible songs. I would be lying if I claimed that I fully understand what Tommy is all about. It's still confusing. I think it's lacking a little bit in the plot development. But then again, what is rather impressive or noteworthy is that the subjects Tommy deals with are extremely grim and dark at times. So even though this is an album from 1969, this certainly is not your flower power hippie rock album. And The Who actually never embraced the flower power spirit. So while others were singing about the dawn of the age of Aquarius, The Who were singing about murder, sexual abuse, and traumatization. And maybe that says something about me, which is not too promising, but I always would take this over the dawn of Aquarius. Tommy rightfully is considered an absolute rock classic. It shows up on most important albums of all time lists frequently to this day, and I guess that will also be the case in the future. This wasn't to be Pete Townshend's last big concept work. In fact, several fans of The Who will probably argue that Quadrophenia is the better album and the better concept. But to me, Tommy, as an album experience and also as a musical experience, is the more satisfying one of those two big concept albums by The Who. And if you've watched this super long video to the very end now, you are either a big fan of the Tommy album, or maybe you are somebody who is just getting into the rock classics. In that case, get Tommy if you haven't heard it. And all that's left for me to say is, of course, I did not really hurt my finger at the beginning of this video. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more Murdock Music Minutes.